Welcome, Team Rhino. During the month of June, IRF is focused on reforestation. You can help us plant trees in Indonesia's Way Kambas National Park in Sumatra. For every $1 donated, you will plant a tree. And with every $1,000 raised, IRF and its partners will plant an acre of new rainforest in the park. Joining me today is Stephanie Hedt and Andrew Elphinstone of Taronga Zoo, Sydney, and Taronga Conservation Society Australia. Taronga is an IRF partner and supports a variety of programs in Indonesia. Welcome, Stephanie and Andrew, and thank you for joining me today. I wonder if you could get us started by telling us a little bit about Taronga.
Sure, I'd love to tell you about Taronga. So Taronga is a conservation organisation that operates 2 zoos in New South Wales, Australia. Taronga Zoo in Sydney and Taronga Western Plains Zoo in Dubbo. So what some people might not know is that we participate in a range of other industries and programs, not only kind of operating our 2 zoos. So we work in leading education, science and conservation, which are run through our Taronga Institute of Science and Learning, which is based in Sydney. Taronga is a not-for-profit, meaning all of the revenue that's raised through our zoos and also the Taronga Foundation go to support our important international programs such as those that we participate in Indonesia. So very broad range of activity, which is, you know, it's exciting to be involved in.
Great. And how did you get involved with IRF?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, actually. I had to ask our current CEO what the background was, but Taronga is a founding member of the International Rhino Foundation. So I think that was early 1990s. So we've been in this partnership for a long time together now. The partnership was initiated through a former IRF CEO who wanted to bring together a kind of a consortium of members to begin the International Rhino Foundation as we know it today. Taronga was particularly interested in being involved with the IRF because we were particularly involved with the black rhino breeding and research program. We now have 3 of 5 rhinos on site at Taronga Western Plains Zoo, and we're known as one of the best international breeders for black rhino as well. So we've had a long-standing history and interest in rhinos, and that's now developed through time into all sorts of different rhino programs. But I'm very pleased to say that our partnership with IRF is one of Taronga's longest standing and strongest partnerships that we have, just based on that long-term relationship that we've had together and all of the different programs that we're interested in working together on. The Taronga CEO is on the board of the International Rhino Foundation, you know, which is one of his favourite boards, and it enables us to work hand in hand with the IRF on conservation of rhino across the globe, you know, Africa programs, India, and of course Indonesia.
Great. And I wonder if you, oh, Andrew, yeah, please jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think it was in building on what Steph just said, that expertise developed at managing several rhino species at our Taronga Western Plains Zoo is what led to us having this really strong working relationship with IRF and Yabi in Sumatra. And a lot of that, the foundations of that were built around rhino health and rhino management, and particularly our vets playing a big role in that side of the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary program over there. And from there, over the years, the relationship and our level of involvement in Sumatra just keeps growing.
Yes, definitely. Taronga's been a part of the SRS in Sumatra for a very long time, aiding with your expertise and as you said, veterinary sciences and as well as facility management and other areas. Before we get into a little bit more of that, we're talking habitat management here this month. Talk to me about why habitat management and the recovery of new habitat is important to wildlife survival.
Yeah, I'll field that one. So it's with the case of, I guess, the Sumatran rhino, using the example, with the Sumatran Rhino Survival Alliance, there's a pretty good plan in place to address a lot of the threatening processes. So those things around poaching and security of animals, isolation and animals actually being able to come together and breed and so forth. But one of the major challenges is obviously that fragmentation of habitat in Sumatra and the loss of habitat in Sumatra. I think since 1990, Sumatra's lost around 40% of its lowland forests, so the forests that the Sumatran rhinos call home. And with that, having that Sumatran Rhino Survival Alliance and that plan in place means, you know, there's some hope for the future there. And now's the time to actually be planning for success. So it's one thing to be trying to intensively protect and manage the few rhinos that remain. But there simply isn't enough habitat left. So we've actively got to be working with partners on the ground in restoring, creating and protecting more habitat for the future. And not just for rhinos, that habitat also supports other critically endangered species like Sumatran tigers and a whole suite of flow-on effects for the biodiversity found in the lowland forests of Indonesia.
Definitely. Thank you for putting that so succinctly. That is exactly why we're running a campaign, is to work towards the future of what we hope to accomplish with the plan from the Indonesian government, as well as the Sumatran Rhino Alliance, which both IRF and Taronga are partners in. What are some, we talked a little bit about this, but what are some of the ways that Taronga has been involved in Indonesia?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So Taronga's been involved with programs in Indonesia for over a decade now. As the closest neighbour to Australia, and one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet, we feel that it's pretty cool Australia celebrates and supports the bilateral relationship in many different ways. And Taronga has certainly kind of led the way in conservation and working with other zoos in Indonesia on, you know, conservation issues and issues that are really important for the bilateral relationship. So I can talk to a couple of different things. We've done so many different things, and I could probably talk for about an hour on all of the ins and outs of the programs I've run over the last, you know, 5 years that I've been working for the zoo. But I'll give you a little bit of a snapshot of some of the things that we've done. One example is that we have transferred two giraffe to a zoo, Ragunan Zoo in Jakarta. So we worked on that for about, you know, 10 years of paperwork to try and get that transfer happening. But it's a great way that we can build capacity for the teams on the ground at Ragunan Zoo, teach them about managing animal populations, and just talk to them about conservation and the, you know, different issues that they're facing in Indonesia. Secondly, we actually have an Indonesian themed tiger exhibit at Taronga Zoo in Sydney. So it actually invites our guests to board a plane to Sumatra. They took a short flight and arrive in a replica village of the Way Kambas National Park, which actually talks to, you know, how close that relationship is between Taronga and Way Kambas. The guests search for tigers in the national park and learn about palm oil and the impact that palm oil is having on tiger habitat in Indonesia, as well as, you know, all the other species that Indonesia is known for. We can then encourage the guests to learn a bit more about how they can shop for products that use sustainable palm oil. So it's really that behaviour change that we're trying to encourage with all of our guests in the zoo. But also for me, it, you know, speaks closely to my heart that we've got a little slice of Indonesia in our zoo in Sydney. So one of my proudest moments in my career at Taronga has been inviting, you know, Indonesian colleagues over to the tiger exhibit opening and showing them how dedicated we are to supporting their work. So Pak Widodo came over for that, and we had the National Park representative come over for that, as well as IRF actually came over. So that was a really one of my best moments of working at the zoo. But of course, the third and most crucial example of our work is the announcement of Taronga's Legacy Species Program in 2016. So Taronga committed to supporting 10 critical species over the next 10 years. 5 are Australian species and 5 are those from Sumatra. So that's the tiger, elephant, sun bear, Sunda pangolin, and of course the Sumatran rhino. So Andrew and I are responsible for delivering this program of support in Sumatra. And this means working with all of those local organisations as well as international organisations to improve that trajectory, sorry, for these species. And, you know, this includes kind of a restoration program that we're talking about, and also ecotourism development that are really central to our strategy. Do you have anything to add there, Andrew?
Yeah, I guess I'd add that, so if you're just starting to touch on, I guess, our focus and in partnership with IRF on both the social as well as the environmental, and working to set up that ecotourism program so that there's benefits for the community, you know, financially and through other means, and as well as working on the conservation, more traditional conservation side with habitat restoration. I guess personally, some of the things that I've really enjoyed, and maybe the viewers might be interested in, is, you know, Taronga does a lot of staff exchanges with, particularly with the SRS, and we send our staff over there regularly, and likewise we've had vets, Zulfi and Vera, come and do placements at our zoos and work with our veterinary officers in Australia. And I just really value the time. I try and get over there about once a year, the time with our partners on the ground, and they often lead to little things, you know, little exchanges of skills or things that we can help with. And, you know, so it's not just, I guess, you know, vets, wildlife management and conservation stuff, but before we've sent electricians over, you know, to help with some infrastructure stuff, because, you know, we manage zoos and we're good at animal containment, and they, you know, they were having some challenges with some of their issues. So there's little things like that pop up and these little out of our visits that we try and, you know, and try and assist with and work together on. And one of them, you know, the program you're working on at the moment as well, Steph, around helping design, you know, a visitor centre and working collaboratively on education materials and things like that. You know, they're really, really enjoyable things to be a part of, as well as that, you know, that they're, you know, doing them for a really good reason and they're going to have good outcomes. Those actual relationships and working on those projects is quite, you know, it's personally enjoyable being a part of that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump to ecotourism since you mentioned it. That's great. So, you know, here at IRF, we always get the question, is it possible to go visit the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary? And it's such a wonderful place. And I know why everybody wants to go. With such charismatic rhinos there as well. So what is this ecotourism might look like in the future for the potential to visit the SRS?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's probably one of my favorite places in the world. So I can absolutely understand why people want to go and, you know, see that most wonderful place. And, you know, hopefully we're working on it. So Taronga is working with the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary, the Way Kambas National Park, local government, and Ecolodges Indonesia to develop an ecotourism product for Way Kambas. And a highlight of that program will be a visit to the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary. So visitors will be able to learn about the rhino and take a guided tour of a rainforest trail to find and meet the Sumatran rhino. So this will be the only opportunity in the world to see these critically endangered rhinos. So it's an absolute pleasure to be kind of working with all the teams to put together a wonderful framework where people from all over the world can come and see the Sumatran rhino, learn about their plight, and also obviously learn about what they can do to help the rhino in the future. The ecotourism program also wants to highlight other great activities that visitors can do in the Way Kambas National Park area. You know, everything from a river journey to, you know, helping to plant some trees, You know, there's lots of great activities we can do in that national park, and what it actually does is that it supports the communities. So not only going to the Rhino Sanctuary and supporting their work, but broadening that work. And, you know, we can do homestays and staying with the actual local families to give them a source of income. So look, I think it's a great program, and I cannot wait until it's all ready to go. But in the meantime, you can actually go to the Taronga website and you can register your interest to be on the email list. So as soon as it's ready to go, we will let you know, and you can book in the first tour. So obviously, pending the current global health situation, we're aiming to take a couple of bookings for 2021. So it's not that far away. So, you know, go and have a look at the website, definitely.
And what's that website?
It's taronga.org.au.
Taronga.org.au. Definitely check that out. You definitely want to be on one of the first trips there. And I'm glad you mentioned the benefit to the local community, because people are as important as wildlife to conservation. And so that benefit to the local villages that surround the park is very important to IRF as well. And we're excited that it's part of a really exciting project that I'm sure we'll be talking to Stephanie about in the near future as well. While we're talking about some of those local villages, and let me catch back up here with questions. With the reforestation project, which we'll get into a little bit more closely, and we'll talk about fires as well here in a second. But that reforestation project also involves local villages around the park. Tell us a little bit more about why it's important to involve local villages in the entire ecosystem that is Way Kambas.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Steph.
Yeah,
We
right.
both went to jump on that one. Look, I'll start, I guess, broadly speaking, in terms of philosophy behind conservation and conservation management. So Taronga takes what we call a 360-degree approach, which is a focus on wildlife, habitat, and communities. Another way, or a way I like to think about that, is the 4 C's of conservation, and the 4 C's is sort of philosophy sort of came out of some parks in Africa. So people particularly passionate about some of the African rhino species might be familiar with the philosophy. But essentially what it says, or what it means, is that to get lasting conservation outcomes, when you're designing a program, it needs to be commercially viable, it needs to be culturally appropriate, and it needs to engage the local community in a meaningful way. And if you can do that, you get your 4th C, which is your lasting conservation outcome. You know, all the communities need to have ownership and feel ownership of these things, and understand and have value from them. Otherwise, you know, changes in governments, in policy, in funding, and things like that can really shift how much effort or just halt entire programs. And you know, in the conservation industry, we see it happen all the time. But when the local community has that high sense of engagement and ownership, then you've got the people power to make lasting change. So that's very much the philosophy we take to the programs that we run and the partnerships we're involved in. And I know IRF has similar philosophies as well, certainly in how they work. Maybe
Absolutely.
Steph, you wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about what's going on within those programs.
Yeah, look, I just want to, I guess my addition is that really the community is that first and last line of defence for forest habitat and animal populations. And being able to build that sustainable growth, education, social and economic stability in those communities around the national park really brings value to the environment and those natural resources. And putting value to that habitat not only changes the behaviour of those local people towards the environment but the community are also the first to protect it from threats. You know, for example, they might be the first to alert authorities of some strange activity happening in town, whether it's a new car or, you know, there's a fire or something like that, poachers, loggers, all of those things. They can report those and they feel confident to protect this forest that's so important to their livelihoods. I guess, you know, the community approach has to be multifaceted. And it's often very unique to an area. So, you know, it takes a long time to develop and you need to do it with the people in consultation. So patience is very important. But in my opinion, it's probably the single best long-term approach to conservation, particularly in Indonesia, is really having those communities involved. And we are doing lots of work in that space. And I think the ecotourism product is a really good example of what we're trying to do there, but also the restoration, you know, we're involving those local communities, we're giving people jobs, we're trying to give them a meaningful livelihood from that reforestation.
Yeah, there's a definite local community component to that reforestation project, and the fact that local farms are actually growing the plants that will be planted. Local workers will be hired to plant those plants, maintain those areas. Local workers are hired to harvest browse for the SRS, and those areas will actually in 4 or 5 years be able to provide that to the SRS as well, as those plants grow. And I think the most interesting story to come out of it, and I don't know if you guys had heard this one yet, is that in the second site that is part of this project, it's actually right on the border of the local village, and they're planting trees on the outside of it that actually the local village will be able to harvest fruit from. And they're planting trees in the core that animals will be able to eat from. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. And kind of the common tree is the jackfruit, right? Because rhinos like that, and so do people. So there'll be a shared resource there when that forest becomes mature again. So
yeah,
I love that story.
I was lucky enough to visit that site in January this year, and it was, to be honest, it was a little bit of a surprise because Inov and Pakianto from the national park said, "Oh, you know, we've got something to show you." We'd been to Site 1, the restoration site, which I've visited a few times and helped with some planning and things around. They took us to the second site and we met some of the people in that community and talked about how it's going to work, and it's sort of in its foundational stages. But yeah, I love the way Inov and Pakianto are sort of setting that up to have the really strong community ownership. But yeah, also it's providing food for people and for wildlife, you know, so win-win.
Yeah, and you know, maybe it'll play into the ecotourism project at some point as well. So ability to have local fruits. Got to get to an issue that is, I know, a tough one to talk about, particularly since both of you lived through this. But fires, 2019 seemed to be the year of the fire, and fires struck habitats around the world, most notably in Australia. Why is fire becoming such a huge impact at this time?
Yeah, the fire one. I mean, everyone would be well aware that Australia has just finished its worst fire season in our recorded sort of history, and had just huge areas of forest across the entire country burn, and burn in much higher temperatures than previously. I guess what's driving that change is climate change. So we're having those longer periods of really dry weather, and then when we do have our sort of, you know, a few years of rainfall, we have a lot of rainfall. So we're getting a lot more variability in our weather and in our climate. And then when you do have these fire events, they're more severe. One of the worrying things as well is that all the climate modelling suggests they're not only going to be more severe, they're going to be more frequent. And this isn't unique to Australia. We saw a lot of fires in Brazil last year and also in Indonesia. Unfortunately, these sites in all of those countries are often the last refugia for some really endangered species. And when you've got habitat on that scale that burns, there's nowhere for that wildlife to go. They can't, move to the next patch, or they can't escape it in many cases. So managing fire quite strategically around key pieces of habitat is going to be a very, very important conservation management tool over the decades to come, because we just can't afford to lose more lowland forests in Sumatra or box gum woodlands on the east coast of Australia. We've got far too many threatened species that depend on what's left.
Yeah, and if our viewers don't know, 2019, you mentioned there were fires in Indonesia. There was also one in Way Kambas that, despite heroic efforts from both rangers and even rhino protection units that jumped in to help their colleagues, actually jumped over the fire break, was wind aided, and burned 25 acres of site 1 of this project. So a big part of this project is actually replanting that site that seedlings had been started, planted by local communities. Even Girl Scout, Boy Scout troop school groups came and planted trees there, and they were wiped out within a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
So
I was
yeah,
well,
go
sorry,
ahead,
I was
Andrew.
gonna say I was at site 1 in, I think it was, I can't get the year right now. It must have been early 2019 last, I think. And I think it was established about maybe 12 or 18 months before that. So there was some good growth going on, and it was nice to see things all progressing. And then I was there in January this year. Of course, the fires went through in, I think, late November. And met with the team, and who are all just devastated. They put years of work into this site, and we did a bit of a review of their fire breaks and fire management strategies and things like that. And they have pretty good systems in place, but they're just a bit, when a fire front's that large, they're a bit overwhelmed, I guess, by it and the firefighting resources they had. So that's something that Taronga and IRF and the team on the ground have been talking about a lot, is a focus at that site on firefighting capacity in the future. So having, if that's more trucks and more deep wells and things like that, they obviously come at a cost, but they'll better equip the teams to be able to fight fires in the future, because the reality is it will happen again. It may not be for 5 or 10 years or maybe even 20 years, but it's, fires in that part of the world are going to be happening again and again.
Yeah, definitely. And your recommendations were very helpful, and the National Park team has already dug a new deep well and has brought in some additional fire equipment already to prepare for the potential risk in the next dry season. Let's end on some happier notes, shall we? But there was a lot of devastation. There is a lot of hope from both the local communities in the area, the national park staff, and of course the Yabi staff, and they're very excited about the potential of this project to overcome some of those issues that they've had in Site 1 and to improve Site 2. What are some of the other things that give you hope for the survival of the Sumatran rhino? And we'll start. We'll start with you, Angie.
I'll start. I think just touching on what you said, the resolve of those partners, their dedication and the commitment is inspiring and to be admired. When I've been on the ground and sat around with whether it's the rhino in the forest and having a cup of coffee before they go on patrol and having a chat, or in the director Subakir, the director of the national park, in his office and sitting down and talking about habitat restoration with IRF and Yabi and the park staff, and their commitment and dedication to overcoming those challenges is so strong. Like there's no doubt, they're all just challenges that will be overcome, but there's no doubt of, I guess, success in what's trying to be achieved. And I guess the other thing that gives me a lot of hope is that with the Sumatran Rhino Alliance and the survival plan, it's a good comprehensive plan. There's a lot of critically endangered species out there that are teetering on the brink that don't have a well-coordinated action plan with, you know, the depth of expertise of people contributing to implementing it. Now, like executing it is going to be challenging, and it's going to take years of persistence. You know, it'll take decades. Well, there's been decades of work already, but it'll take many more to really turn around the trajectory for the Sumatran rhino. But there's a good plan in place, and there's a good coalition of partners in place. And that, combined with the very strong wills of the local people and communities involved, I think gives a lot of promise for the future of that species and for the others that share the habitat in Sumatra.
And Stephanie?
Oh, look, I absolutely echo those comments from Andrew. What I think is amazing is that we've got experts from around the world dedicating their time and resources to this species. So they've obviously, you know, they've got a captive audience, and we're all ready to, you know, help in any way we can. And I think, you know, Taronga has a big community here donating to this work and supporting this work for Sumatran rhino and our other Sumatran legacy species. And, you know, from a Taronga perspective, we're, you know, determined not to let them down. And I think that's, you know, across the world, we're seeing organisations doing that. So I've got a lot of hope that, you know, together we will be able to, you know, bring them back, or, you know, keep them alive for those future generations to love as much as we do.
Great. And how can people get involved?
So you can go to Taronga website. You can register your interest for a Sumatran eco tour, which I've mentioned. Also on our website, you'll find some information about our legacy species project. So all of those Sumatran species that I've been talking about. You can follow us on social media. We've just launched Taronga TV, as we've been closed during COVID, and there's some great material on there. Absolutely come and visit us when you're in Sydney. Come and visit Taronga, come and visit, you know, the rhinos at Western Plains Zoo and Tiger Trek. But of course, you can generously donate to the reforestation project that IRF is running in partnership with Taronga.
Great, thank you. How about some last thoughts from you, Andrew?
You put me on the spot a bit now. I guess I'm looking forward to what we working together can achieve in the future, particularly around habitat restoration. The work that's going on now, I often sort of talk about as the pilot project phase. There'll be a lot of learnings that will come out of it, and it'll get some good results. But the capacity to significantly scale it up, there's in the area the team's working on the edge of the really good quality habitat in Way Kambas. There's literally thousands of hectares that many years ago were rainforest and potentially rhino habitat that can be restored. So for your donors that are, you know, putting in a few bucks here and there to plant a few trees, as you said, just $1 can plant a tree. So any amount helps. But we want to, over the next couple of years, make sure that this site is really successful and we get those learnings out of it, because in the future, we want to see a long-term, very ambitious habitat restoration program, looking to restore thousands of hectares in Way Kambas and really significantly increase the viable habitat for Sumatran rhinos and tigers and all the suite of other species that call that part of the world home.
Great. Stephanie, any last thoughts from you?
Nothing for me. I guess, the thing that I'm most excited about is getting on the ground once COVID's over, and really working through all of these exciting projects and plans. And the day that I run that first eco tour will be a brilliant day. So looking forward to having everyone along to those.
We look forward to that as well. So we're hopeful that we can get back to traveling and get back to being open everywhere, and definitely plant as many acres as possible over the course of the next few years. I want to thank Stephanie and Andrew for joining me today, and especially your support for rhinos. Thank you to Taronga for longstanding partnership with IRF and with other programs in Indonesia as well. It's great to work with you, and it's great talking with you today. So thank you again.
It's been great, Chris, and IRF and our partners in Indonesia is certainly one of Taronga's absolute highest priorities, and we look forward to working together for many more years to come.
Great. Well, you can join Taronga and IRF, and you can replant rainforest and give rhinos and other wildlife, as they mentioned, the Sumatran tigers, the elephants, the sun bears, the pangolins, and so many more live in that area. You can give them all more room to roam. Every $1 donated during this campaign plants a tree. IRF will say thank you to you with a certificate, and you can show that off proudly. With every $1,000 donated, IRF and its partners will plant an entire acre. And we'll recognize you with your name on a sign on location. That's right. You'll actually be a permanent part of this project. So donate today at rhinos.org/reforestation. Thanks as always, Team Rhino, and we'll see you next time.